Welcome everyone to another session of TriTech University. My name is Bill Steppen, and today we are going to be looking at the multi-store inventory handling of AIM-SI. It's assumed at this point that if you are attending today's webinar that you have grown to a point where you either already have multiple store locations or you have a store location and a warehouse, an offsite warehouse. Maybe you are at a point where you're looking to add on to your store locations and you're looking to see how AIM-SI can handle all of that. We'll be looking at all of these things and probably a little bit more, of course, in today's session. Before we jump into all of that content, as always, we are using GoToWebinar. So with GoToWebinar, there's a toolbar, and in that toolbar, there is a questions box. If at any point during today's session you have a question on the content, feel free to type that into that questions box. If you see me checking over here, I'm making sure that you're all able to hear me, see me. I'm also looking in at any incoming questions so I can try and answer those as timely as possible. We will have some time at the end for a Q&A session, so if I don't get to it right away, we'll definitely try and answer it at the end of the session. And that being said, if that toolbar is taking up too much screen real estate and you're having a hard time seeing what I'm presenting, there's a little orange button with a white arrow. Click on that and that will shrink down the GoTo toolbar so that it can get out of the way and you can continue to see what I'm showing. So that being said, let's take a look at the AIM-SI session that I have open here. So you should be seeing my screen. As I mentioned, today we're going to be looking at a couple of different facets of multiple store inventory. The idea behind that is that maybe you now have a couple of different facilities at which you're storing inventory. Maybe you don't necessarily need to order inventory to fulfill potential customer purchase at one location. If you have some inventory at another location that could fulfill that without having to go through the whole rigmarole of doing a special order to the vendor and waiting however long that might take to get the order. If you've got someplace else that's local that you could just either direct the customer to, maybe across town, or if you have something where in the matter of a day you could go pick it up and bring it back, and then they could stop in the next day to pick it up or later that afternoon. These are definite aces in the sleeve as far as maybe any other competition in the area or them ordering online from a big box online e-tailer like anyone that rhymes with Glamazon. Yeah, we'll take a look at those elements. We're also going to look at how to do transfer requests. So if you are at a location that's running low on inventory, but you see that you would be able to get some from another location to get you by until the next time an ordering session rolls around, you can put in a transfer request. We're going to look at those, and then we'll finally wrap up today's session with looking at the concept of a purchase order worksheet, what that means to you as a purchasing agent, and assuming you are a purchasing agent or for the purchasing agent at your place of business, how you can take advantage of that. So let's first and foremost start off with the idea of maybe you're just opening up another location, or you have a second location physically. Now you have just purchased another store location license for AIM-SI, and you need to copy that inventory into your system at the second location or the third location so that you don't have to create it all manually. In AIM-SI, if you go into the modules menu and into inventory, into our utilities menu, one of the utilities that you have in AIM-SI is a create SKUs at new location program. So when you come into this program, it's going to ask you what's the old location where the inventory is going to come from, and what's the new location that it will go to. So basically you're going to check mark which inventories you want to copy over. Do you want to copy over accessory inventory, serial SKU inventory, both, and also the idea of potentially zeroing out the min and max amounts that are relevant maybe at one location, but maybe not so much at another. Now, if you want to start with those mins and maxes, that's a great way of getting started with that. If you've attended some of the min-max sessions that we've done earlier this month, you might already be familiar with how that works. But basically, you can check mark which ones you want to bring over. You can say what the old location is, or kind of a starting location, what the new location is that doesn't have any of that inventory, and then you can, if necessary, pick and choose certain combinations of categories. In AIM-SI and technically in Windows in general, when you are presented with a selection table like this, as opposed to a drop-down, you can either select them individually, or by holding down the Control key on your keyboard, you can make multiple selections. And by the way, if you have selected one and you want to unselect it with the Control key held down, you can just click on it again and that'll unselect it. You can also select a range of options by using the Shift key. So if I click on the amps and speaker enclosures category here, and let's say I want to select the first 5 here, amps through general accessory, I can hold down Shift, and then by clicking on general accessory, it goes ahead and selects all of those for me. Now, as is the case, if nothing is selected, then technically everything is selected. So if I don't have any category selections at all, it will go ahead and copy over everything in which I've made those check marks. So right now, technically what this would do is this would copy all of that inventory from Dubuque to Iowa City. You'll notice up at the top that it says this program will create inventory at the new location, and they'll be created with a 0 quantity. It's basically making the assumption that we don't want to assume that you're starting with any given quantity from, in this case, Dubuque to Iowa City, or from location A to location B. It'll just copy the records. So with the records then at the new location, you would then ideally go through and do a physical inventory, and that would give you the ability to actually put in those counts through the physical inventory process. And if you've never done a physical inventory before with AIM-SI, I have done a webinar on that. Definitely check that out. That is available in the V12 webinar archives. It's also available technically if you're still coming from an older version, and maybe you're coming from that, you want to do it in V11 and get the numbers right before moving into V12, and you want to see exactly how it's done in version 11. There is a webinar, actually a video webinar in the videos section of the member portal that you can check out. I think it's called something like using physical inventory, or using LBX10 for physical inventory. Either way, it's basically going through the physical inventory process, and that one is specific to version 11. The one in the V12 archives on the GoToStage site presently is specific to version 12. Technically, there's no difference between the two. It's all graphical, essentially. The actual process is basically the same. But I just wanted to mention that since we were talking about this whole concept of starting with accurate numbers at a new location. So let's say now that you've got inventory at all of your different locations, and now it's time to start managing that. So if we, at the very basic element, start over here back to the inventory menu and looking at the inventory transfer options, you have a process called store-to-store transfers. Now, when you come in here, basically what it's going to ask is what's the transfer from location and what's the transfer to location. So in this case, maybe from Dubuque to Iowa City. The transfer from location will technically default to whichever store location your workstation is set to. So you might have noticed how it automatically came up with the Dubuque location here. But you could technically go the opposite way. You could say that you are performing a store-to-store transfer on behalf of Iowa City to Dubuque. Maybe it's always the possibility that there are no computers at the second location, especially if it's a warehouse location. So you could technically say that you're transferring from your remote location to your local location. So either way you're going to do it, it's going to be stamped with a date time, with a transfer number. It's basically your reference number. And then from there, you're just basically putting in the quantities and the SKUs that you're looking to transfer. So say we're going to transfer an RT14 to KB400Ns. You can obviously scan these in if you've got them in front of you. Maybe you're prepping a transfer to go out. You can also use the import function. So basically what it would do is it would look for an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file. It's going to look for it. As you can see, when you hover over it, it's going to come up with this little tooltip saying that it's going to look for text from either the data collector, that same LDX10 data collector that I mentioned for the physical inventory routine. You can either use that to create it, or you could just create one manually. Basically, it's going to look for the SKU in column A, or if you're using CSV, you're basically just typing it in, and then comma, space, the quantity, or if you're using an Excel, the column B would have the quantity. It is going to ignore whatever is in basically that first row, because it's going to assume that you have essentially column headers up at the top where you have column A saying SKU serial, column B in row 1 saying quantity, and then it will go ahead and import those in. And you'll notice it also says that any imported serial numbers will always default the quantity to 1. So that's how you can actually import what the SKU serial number actually is for the system. So if you need to, you can use the template button to create one, and then you can just basically fill in that template, bring it back in here, point it to that file, click the import button, and then it will basically show you on this listing what everything is that's going to get pulled in, technically transferred, I should say, and then when you're ready to finalize that, you would go through and you would hit the save button. And that would basically do the transfer. Now, when it comes to that actual transfer, the default is that it will assume the transfer is done. The products are already transferred and they're there ready to go at whatever the transfer to location is. Now, if you would like to not have that happen, if you would like to have the extra element of control that you're assuming these items are now actually en route, so they're in the back of the truck, they're on their way over, and you want to qualify them as not being at either location A or location B, they're en route. They're basically considered out. What you can do is there is a system variable. Let's go ahead and look that up together, because offhand I don't remember exactly what the variable's called, but if you're all familiar with where the variables are in general maintenance, we go to system variables, and let's go ahead and just search for that transfer variable here. So the variable is called transstore to store in transit. Basically what this says is, should items involved in a store-to-store transfer be marked as out in transit until the receiving store receives them? And if you want that to be the case, you would change this to a Y. And basically it's letting you know that if you are switching this variable, you want to make sure that you actually close out any and all open store-to-store transfers. So it's saying you should run the program of receive all store-to-store transfers, which if we go back to the utilities menu in inventory, you'll notice that there is a program for that. It's called receive all store-to-store transfers right here. Basically, when you hit proceed with that, it'll just mark them all as having been received. So that's basically how you can kind of complete that if you were looking to switch this. Now, if you turn this variable on, what will happen is when you're looking at an inventory record, if we go ahead and hop back over to just a display inventory, I'll look up an RT14 here just to get something up here, and we'll go ahead and look at the details. So in the details screen, if you're familiar with how AMSI manages inventory at this point, there's this quantity out field. So in quantity out, you'll notice it currently says 0 because I don't have anything out. But when you press F6, while your cursor is in that field, or technically the field is highlighted, there is a a little breakdown of all of the quantities that are considered out. And one of those quantities is an in-transit quantity. I'm going to actually grab my little highlighter tool just to try and bring more attention to that here. So in transit specifically, that is going to only be populated with numbers from store-to-store transfers when you have that variable turned on. If you don't have it turned on, it's basically going to be considered, like I said, immediately transferred. And then let's just go ahead and close that out here. So assuming you have that turned on and you want to be able to then mark them as having been received without having to do them all like that utility would accomplish. When we go back to the transfer options window, you can see there is a program for receive store transfers. And basically what it would do is it would default to, again, the location that you're physically at, in this case, transfer to Dubuque, and it would show all of the open transfers that have not yet been flagged as received. It would show you the reference, the date of the transfer, the from location, and the to location. You'd be able to view it if you needed to, so you could view the items that were on that transfer. Let's actually go ahead and do a transfer so you could see what this looks like, and I am going to go ahead and turn that variable on just to complete this whole concept here. So let's turn the trans store to store in transit on with a value of ES. By the way, since we're here, you might notice that there are a couple of other transfer-esque variables here. There's a transfer build inventory. Do you want the assemble kits and create new serial number to create a transfer out record if you're basically transferring it well, this is more of a store-to-store location type thing. This is more of if you're wanting a record that it got used to build a new item. This transfer default location, you can see how it says this variable controls the default transfer from location. If this is blank, it'll just use the default location from your workstation, but you could put in the location code if, like I said, maybe you're dealing with a workstation type, or excuse me, warehouse type situation, and you don't want to keep constantly changing it, that you're transferring from the warehouse to your store. In this instance, you could basically go in and you could put in the location code of the warehouse so that it would default to the warehouse as being the transfer from, and you could then pull it in as the transfer to locally. And then the other one here, the transfer store to store receipt, do you want it to create a receipt? And then if so, what do you want to actually have on that receipt? Do you want the cost, the retail, et cetera, et cetera? So with that all set now, I think I did set that. Did I set it? I got to talking so much that I didn't even look to see if I actually saved that store to store in transit. Yes, I did. Okay. So let's go back to now a store to store transfer. So we'll transfer from, and you can see how it says this is set to true, so you'll need to receive the transfer through receive store transfers. Technically, you still could, it just would be really more for completionist perspective than anything else. Let's go ahead and transfer 5 RT14s. Just because it's a nice, easy thing that we can do. So we'll go ahead and say save on that. And then just so you can see what that would look like, we'll go ahead and show the receipt on screen here so that if you would like, you could basically have a physical copy of it that you might want to have. Technically, you never really have to worry about printing these out because you'll always be able to go back after the fact and get the history from out of the system. And this is that doing that weird thing again where it doesn't want to shrink that down for me. And of course, my computer is running a little bit slower, but there's the transfer receipt. You can see how it says inventory transfer from one location to the other up there in the corner, and it's showing the quantities, and in this case, it's showing the costs based on that system variable that I mentioned. So with the transfer now out there, if we go back and again look at just a quick snapshot of that item, so we'll pull up history or display inventory, we'll pull up our RT14s just so you can see what this looks like. We'll go ahead and pull up the details. And what you should see here now is the quantity is reduced. You remember how this was 32 before. It's now showing 27. Notice how it says quantity out 0 because we're looking specifically at the Dubuque location. Let's actually change this. So now if we go back and look at this from the Iowa City perspective, and then we'll go ahead and do the same thing. We'll look at the details here. What we're going to see is this is now showing quantity on hand 37, quantity available 32, with a quantity out of 5. So they have 32 on premise ready to sell, but they have 5 that they don't yet actually have to sell, but they can technically lay claim to 37 of them. Why is that out there? Because again, like I said, that's showing now the in transit of 5 from Dubuque to Iowa City. When they arrive, what you would then be able to do is go to that Receive Store Transfers program. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go to Receive Store Transfers. Remember that this is going to default to my local location. Let's go ahead and switch it to the Iowa City perspective. There's the reference that we had just done. So if we wanted to see exactly what was on that, especially if there's a lot of transfers going any different which way, we can view it preemptively. So we can see that there were 5 of these on that store-to-store transfer. So we'll go ahead and select it. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to confirm that we got 5 of these in. So here's the original quantity. Let me grab my little highlighter tool again. So here's the original quantity, and it's showing the 5. There have been none that were previously received. You can also technically cancel a transfer if you really needed to, but in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to put in our quantity received over here. So we're basically just going to go ahead and you click right into there. You can type in what the quantity received is. You can also technically right click, and if you know that you got everything, you could basically say tag all items. You'll also notice that there is an import button down here. So if you are using, again, that handheld data collector and you scanned everything off the truck using the Receive Store Transfers function on that data collector, you could then import it in using, again, the SKU and quantity. That'll then record that these items are coming in on this screen, and then you'll be able to go ahead and save that. So again, let's go ahead and just put in our 5, and then we will save that. And those are now completed. We'll show that receipt on screen. Again, the receipts are just for your own paper trail if you want to have them, but there's the receive inventory transfer showing the cost of those items is now officially in stock at Iowa City. So that's basically the idea behind store-to-store transfers. Now that's assuming that you're kind of managing that yourself. When we're talking about potentially someone at a location who needs to get something, but they don't have the authority to just go ahead and say, yes, this is being done. They need to request that, and that request needs to essentially kind of be approved. You'll notice that in this same menu is a transfer request and view transfer requests function. So when we go into transfer request, you'll notice that this is kind of the opposite of what we saw with store-to-store transfers before, where it was defaulting to transfer from Dubuque, transfer to wherever we're sending it. Now the default is transfer to, in this case, Dubuque, and transfer from. Where do we want to pull it from? Well, we could go in and we could say Iowa City. We could say that we want those 5 RT14s back, and we would basically go ahead and save that. And again, this is basically just be a receipt of the transfer request. I'll go ahead and show this up on the screen just for completionist sake. So it's a transfer request. It's not actually completing the transfer. So from an inventory management perspective, if we go back to, let's just go to inventory history and do it this way. So this will be probably a little bit faster, not too much. Let's look at the details here. So again, we're sitting at the Dubuque location. There's no quantity out. There's nothing really going on here. But if we take a look at the Iowa City location and take a look at the details here, notice how this is now technically reducing the quantity available. And if we look at that quantity out and hit F6, you can see it's not actually recording it as in transit, but it is recording a transfer request. So technically what this is doing is in real time at the location from which it was requested, it's reducing that quantity available and it's flagging it as a transfer request. Now, from an internal perspective, what you could technically do, what I know some stores have done, this is something I've also kind of suggested, is when you are at the requesting location and you save that transfer request, you recall how it came up and basically gave me the option for printing a receipt. If you have the email capabilities module activated for AMSI, you could technically send an email to whomever you know is the inventory manager at that location. It's kind of more of an internal training type thing at that point, but basically that's something that you could do in addition to having AMSI holding these items kind of in transit request, so that the person, whoever is at that location, they'd get the email in addition to being able to go in to AMSI to view those. How do they view those? You go into this menu and you go to the view transfer requests. As we can see, what this is basically going to do is this is going to show any transfer requests from this location. So you'll notice nothing is showing up for Dubuque, but if we go ahead and look at the Iowa City location, there is that transfer request. The left-hand side of the menu over here, if you can see my mouse wiggling around, this is going to be the request kind of as a whole. You can see how it's got the reference number, the date, the location, the employee that requested it, and whether this is for a customer account or if it's for store stock. In this case, it's store stock. And then in this case over here, whichever one's highlighted, you're going to see the line items on that transfer request. So in this case, the 5 RT14s. Now, what you can do basically is you can right-click on the transfer. You've got the ability to do a transfer. You could either right-click and choose that, or you could click the transfer button. So when you're wanting to actually fulfill or decline the transfer request, you can go ahead and click the transfer button, and basically that would actually then give you the ability to go ahead and say, yes, let's do that. In fact, if you do it the other way, if I'm not mistaken, you can right click and do the transfer. And basically what that would do is, I thought that would actually pull in those quantities, but I assume not. But basically, you could go in and you can actually say, yes, we're going to go ahead and transfer these to you. Now, if you are going to essentially kind of decline the request, what you could do, if I remember correctly, and I should have actually prepped myself a little bit more for this, but if I remember, there is a return option, or there is basically some way of canceling that request. And now I don't remember exactly where that was, so I'm going to actually get back to everyone on that. But basically, that's how you could go in and do that. I guess technically what you could just do is you could go into the receive store transfers and cancel it from there. But that's basically how AMSI is managing that inventory. So we're going basically the key points here are when something is either transferred or when it's requested, especially when you've got that variable turned on, it's reducing that quantity available as kind of like a reminder of, hey, someone is requesting this. Now, of course, this is assuming that you're doing this manually on an inventory by inventory basis. Let's say that you don't necessarily know what you're running low on, and you would like to see what is potentially out there at any of your other locations that you could use to replenish your inventory ahead of doing an actual order of stock from your vendors. So if we switch gears here, let's actually go out of the inventory menu. We're going to stay in modules and we're going to go to the purchase orders menu. And in your purchase orders menu is a program called replenish stock from other locations. Now, the way that this works is, again, if we take a look up here in the upper right corner, there's the location at which we are at, in this case, Dubuque. Now, you can leave the from location essentially be empty. But basically it's where are you wanting to request the inventory from. If you leave this blank, it will look at essentially all of your other locations. And if you specify a location, then it would only look for the inventory from that specific location. You can also drill down to specific manufacturers, vendors, super categories, seasonal inventories based on the season, categories, subcategories, selection codes. But basically the idea here is what you would do is when you basically refresh this grid, and you can see how you can basically say whether or not you want to look for inventory that's greater than min, greater than max, or greater than the absolute minimum at the requested locations. And it's going to default to that greater than max. When I go ahead and click the refresh on this, it's going to go ahead and analyze the inventory at the current location. It's going to look for anything that's below the current minimum quantity. So you can see how these are coming up with quantities of 2, where the minimum is 3, 5, where the maximum is, or the minimum is 6. And when you highlight an item, so in this case, I'm looking at this item for apparently a book, The Bells of Christmas, or a piece of sheet music, it's going to show me over on this right-hand side in this other table the location code and the applicable numbers, so the minimum, maximum, and the quantity on hand. So in this case, the Iowa City location doesn't have any mins and maxes, unfortunately. So they're technically all over min, max, and min. But in this case, Iowa City happens to have 2 of these. I could essentially say I would like to request X number of them from that location. And if you had 2 or more alternate locations, they would all be showing here as far as their quantities as well. And you could theoretically request a spread of inventory across multiple locations, and that way you're not potentially depleting an entire other inventory just to replenish your own. You could say, I want 1 from Iowa City, another one from Cedar Rapids, a 3rd one from Mason City, a 4th one from Rockford. Wherever they might be coming from, you could basically spread out that request. Now, what that would technically do is that would create transfer requests at these locations so that you're not, again, just assuming that, yes, they are going to send it. They will become transfer requests in their own right at any of these other locations. And when you save that, it would go ahead and create those requests. Now, if you use this auto transfer function, then basically what that would do is that would autofill the transfer quantity for all the SKUs using the selected option. So basically it would say if you're wanting to pull the quantity over max, it would basically kind of go down the list and say, yes, transfer me all the inventory where the quantity is over max, over min, over the absolute minimum, or you could choose all available quantity. So that's what this auto transfer function does, is it's kind of in conjunction with this little selection down here, and it would basically go down this entire list and put in an auto transfer request from all of your locations for all of this inventory. So that's basically how that would work. And like I said, that would then show up as a transfer request at all of those respective locations for those items. Sierra is just reminding me it is an option under store transfers. So as far as that cancel. So thank you very much for that, Sierra. At least I'm assuming that's what you're saying there in your statement to me. Thank you very much. So that's, again, basically the idea behind transfers and balancing inventory across your locations. Again, if you have any questions on any of that, definitely let me know in the questions box. We're going to kind of switch gears now and talk about how to go about properly ordering inventory when you are either looking at inventory across, maybe you are the kind of the headquarters of a number of different stores, and you want to effectively order from your vendor the products that you need to get. You don't necessarily want to bombard them if you've got, let's say, 5 locations You don't necessarily want to bombard them with 5 different purchase orders, maybe over the span of a week or two. You want to send them one purchase order that says, send me these products, or you want to send them all 5 simultaneously, assuming you're maybe having them shipped to the respective locations directly. The other option being where maybe you're going to have them shipped to the warehouse or the headquarters, and then you're going to disperse them locally from there. And that we're going to look at what's called the PO worksheet, the purchase order worksheet. With the purchase order worksheet, and technically you could do this even if you're only have one location. Of course, everyone here probably has more than one if you're attending this webinar. But the idea behind the PO worksheet is it's something that allows you to look at what needs to be ordered for a given vendor, and you can come back to it over time. So unlike, let's say, for example, the stock orders by vendor program, and if you attended my webinar on that, on proper ordering with the stock orders and min-maxes and things like that, you know how basically it comes up and says, okay, here's what you need to order. You either need to save it or you need to cancel it, and in which case you basically have to come back to it later, and then the numbers might have changed, but you don't really have a way of maybe making adjustments, and then you either save it and it's now an order in the system, or you don't save it, you lose your changes, and then you just come back to essentially square one when you come back to it. With the purchase order worksheet routine, what this basically allows you to do is say, let's go ahead and assume that we are planning an order from Coast. And again, of course, whatever vendors you have in your system, this is just for our demonstration purposes. In fact, let's actually say that we're getting these from KMC, because I know I have a lot of products in the KMC factory or KMC camp. We're going to come back to this whole concept of an existing PO worksheet in just a moment, but basically you could use this very similar in respect to the stock orders by vendor function, where you could say, I'm looking for specific inventories and specific categories. I could select a specific super category if I've set those up in version 12. I'm looking for a particular season. I want to look at accessory inventory and or serialized inventory. And apart from that, also where it says include items not below min, or include all items to max quantity. So what I'm going to do is, because I don't exactly know what I've got as far as needing to be ordered, I'm going to uncheck where it says include items for primary vendor. So anyone who has a vendor of KMC, regardless if KMC is the primary vendor or not, should come up on my purchase order worksheet here. And it's also going to include anything that's not currently sitting below minimum, and it's going to recommend to order all items to max quantity. We'll talk about exactly what that means here in just a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and hit proceed. And this should bring up a worksheet that we can now peruse together. So obviously this is a very small sample setting of inventory. Yours is going to be a lot larger, I'm sure, but I want to make sure we have something that's a little bit easier to look at as far as the concept. So we can see here that we've got a smattering of inventory here, and what we're looking at is the inventory record as a whole. Notice how RT14 is coming up in here. It's coming up with an available quantity of 59 and a received quantity recommended quantity of 33 and an order quantity of 33. And you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute, we just looked at these items, this particular item back in the inventory details. They were both sitting for both of those respective locations. They were not sitting at that quantity available. Well, what this is doing is this is consolidating for all of your locations to one number that is technically needed to be ordered. So what we can do is we can come down here where it says display lines. And if we click on that, we can get a breakdown of our highlighted item, in this case, RT14. We can see that in this case, Dubuque is sitting at a minimum of 40, a maximum of 60. The quantity available is 27. The recommended quantity to order is 33 to get us back up to that quantity of 60. So that's what it's recommending to order. Notice how it's not coming up with any recommendation to order for Iowa City because they don't have any mins and maxes, but they are sitting at some quantity available. This is where you can make your adjustment of what you need to order. So let's say we want to go ahead and order some for the Iowa City location. We can go ahead and put in, let's say, 10 there. And when we go ahead and save that, you'll notice it's now coming up and saying the order quantity is 43 for the RT14 line item. So that's kind of the idea there. So just to give you a breakdown of the rest of the details on this table, we're seeing basically the cost of that item, the gross margin percentage of the item, and then these L's here are basically the sales of the last 30 days, the last 365 days, etc. Again, this is a brand new system, so I don't have any sales numbers there. But that's basically the idea there. Now remember how I had check marked where it said order all items to maximum. Notice how this pad is showing an available quantity of 114. It's not coming up with any recommended quantity or order quantity, and that's because technically this item doesn't have any mins and maxes, but it is an item with that has KMC as a vendor, and so it is coming up there. And because I forced it to include items not below min as well as to order all items to max, it's showing up because I told it to include all items not below min, but because there is no maximum that the item has, there's no quantity to order. So this is a good way of kind of forcing everything up on screen. Now, the idea here is that this lets you take your time and analyze inventory for all of your locations. You can come down here and you could, like we just noticed, you could look at the line items, you can look at the sales history. So with the sales history, you can look at it on a location by location basis. You can, again, take your time trying to figure out, well, should we order this amount? Ideally, if you are using the establish, reset, min, max ahead of this PO worksheet, you've got the most up-to-date mins and maxes, so you can base that on the actual sales performance. If you haven't attended that webinar, definitely check it out in the V12 archives. But as I mentioned, if you're just doing the stock orders by location, you either have to save it at that time or forego any potential changes that you're trying to notate and come back to it. Well, this gives you the best of both of those worlds. What you can do is you could go through, you could start to make some adjustments as far as what you're needing to order for every location. And then let's say you want to come back to this. Something is taking your attention away from this. You need to come back to it, but you don't want to just save it as an order. Well, down here in the corner, you'll notice that there is a save type drop down. So let me grab my highlighter, save type, and it's you got some options here. It's defaulting to save worksheet. So let's take a look at what this says. You can see how it says 3 options: save worksheet, save order, save PO. So let's say you want to save this worksheet and come back to it. The worksheet number is up here at the top, the reference number of 1000. Again, let me grab the highlighter tool, or just the spotlight technically. So up here, you can see how it's got the reference number up here, reference number 1000. That is the PO worksheet number. If we want to come back and continue to work on this, then we would basically hit save on this. Now, before I hit save, right below that where it says PO worksheet type, this is what I was also alluding to earlier. You've got 2 options. You can either print a separate purchase order for each location, or you can print a consolidated purchase order using the current location's purchase order address. So again, this is really when you get to saving the purchase order and actually submitting that to your vendor. Do you want one purchase order that goes to your current location's address, so in this case the Dubuque address, or do you want them to get one purchase order for every location that you're ordering product from? So that would be the print separate PO for each location. In this example, because I did force some inventory in there for the Iowa City location, they would wind up getting 2 purchase orders if I chose this option and I'm saving the PO. Otherwise, if I do the print consolidated purchase order, they would get 1 purchase order designed to be sent entirely to Dubuque, Dubuque would then receive the 10 that I ordered of the RT14 for Iowa City, and then it would transfer it from there. But let's say we're not at that point yet where we want to commit to ordering the product. So we're going to save the worksheet. So we'll go ahead and we'll save that. Then at any point, we can come back to the PO worksheet, and this is where we can enter in the existing PO worksheet. We go ahead and type in that 1,000, we go ahead and hit proceed, and then it brings us right back to where we had left off as far as that purchase order worksheet. Now, kind of in a conjunction with all of this, let's say that you do the whole idea of sending that purchase order from the main location, and you want all purchase orders sent to kind of your headquarters or your warehouse. You're going to distribute it from there. There are a few shortcuts that you can take advantage to accommodate that. So if we go back into maintenance, let's go use the on-screen menu here just so it's a little bit easier to follow. We'll go to maintenance, we'll go to general, and we will go to workstations. And here in the workstations, if we take a look at the PO tab, I'm going to highlight here. First of all, here's the print option, so you could technically accommodate whether or not you wanted to default to one or the other for that PO worksheet area. But then what I'm looking for specifically is the receive locations here. So it says how it says receive location right here, and it says receive at location ordered, receive at current location, or receive at current location and transfer. So the idea there is, how do you want MSI to default? If you say you're receiving it at the location ordered, and let's say you ordered it for the Iowa City location, but you had it shipped to the Dubuque location, when you bring it in, it's going to automatically assume that it's being received at the Iowa City location, as I almost knock over my water bottle. You could receive it at the current location. So if you are receiving it as of the Dubuque location, then it's going to say, yes, you've got all this at the Dubuque location. Or, getting back to my point before, you could receive it at the current location and transfer to the ordered location. So this kind of goes in conjunction with the print consolidated PO using the current location's purchase order address, and that's what this is here on screen. If you basically set it up in this fashion, and again, this is only really applicable if you are kind of using your warehouse or your headquarters as kind of like a distribution base, and all orders have to go through there. So you can send them the consolidated PO as of your distribution warehouse or your headquarters. They'll all come to that location, and then having it set up in this way, no worries about having to know where they need to go, because what will happen is it will not only receive it at the current location, because that's where it is, but then it will go ahead and create those transfers, and you'll basically see that it will go ahead and create those transfers and essentially assume that they are now going to be dispersed to where they need to go. So that's kind of the idea behind all that. Now, if I remember correctly, and again, I'm kind of, so far my memory today is striking out. But in the purchase orders menu, I believe there was a report for PO worksheets. Let's see here. Maybe there isn't. Maybe maybe it was the pepperoni pizza that I had last night for dinner. But I thought there was a PO worksheet report. I'm going to look for that as well. But that is basically what I wanted to cover for today's webinar as far as multi-store inventory. Hopefully this has been helpful to kind of give some ideas as to ways to help simplify figuring out what's at any given location, what needs to be replenished, and things of that nature. Before I hop into any questions coming in, I do want to just kind of wrap up as I normally do with our upcoming webinar schedule. So this Friday, we are going to be diving into the whole idea of lease pool inventory. If you have any inventory that is on hand for the purposes of rental revenue, essentially, is kind of the big idea there. Maybe you've got a school band kind of fleet of instruments, and they're not intended to sell, but they are intended to rent and bring in revenue that way. Or maybe you have some firearms for the range, or maybe you have some vacuums that are meant for weekend cleanings, things like that. Maybe you've got some golf clubs that are back there for renting for the driving range, etc., stuff like that. No matter which way you slice it, these items are typically meant to be best handled with a depreciation of that cost over time, as opposed to just having it sit in inventory and impact your basically your fixed assets or your current assets. So that's what we'll be talking about on Friday. Now, I'm going to make the disclaimer right now. I'm by no means an accountant, so I can't really answer direct questions revolving around the benefits of depreciation, but I will be able to show how it all gets set up and how that gets accomplished as far as actually depreciating that inventory. It's basically what we're going to be talking about on Friday. Then we're moving into the month of April, and for April we're going to be focusing on accounting. And of course, now I just said that I'm not an accountant, but we're going to be talking about accounting related features in AIM-SI. I do not yet have the schedule of webinars finalized, but look for webinars the week of the 8th and the 22nd. So we're going to continue with our Monday, Wednesday, Friday format. So that'll be the 8th, the 10th, the 12th, and the 22nd, the 24th, and the 26th. So we're going to be looking at basically all things accounting. So general ledger, accounts payable, maybe even some accounts receivable. We'll be talking about maybe some collection type things, anything related to accounting. Look for 6 webinars relating to that. As always, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend these webinars and ask some questions. That helps me keep attentive and alert, as always, these are always going to be available in the archive. So as long as you got that maintenance plan going on, you can access these at any time. We will probably get to a point where I'll be doing some refreshers on these webinars as things change with version 12, with enhancements and features and things like that you've suggested or that have just come about with the advent of new technology. We'll be going back and looking at any major changes, highlighting those and talking about other things as well. But we're just scratching the surface as far as webinars on version 12. So stay tuned to your email, to social media, and let's see what we got as far as any questions coming in. So Donnie asks, we've recently begun warehousing quickly moving accessories at our central hub. Before I run stock orders by vendors, I run creating transfer requests. If I run replenish stock from other locations and create transfer requests, is this taken into account when I run the PO worksheet? So if I'm reading that correctly, Donnie, yes, technically it is, because that PO worksheet, when it looks at that quantity to recommend to order, it's going to be going off of that quantity available. As you might have noticed, when it's looking at that quantity available, it's reducing the quantity available based on those transfer amounts. So when you transfer out from one location, it's basically saying, okay, yes, these are probably not going to be here. We probably need to order more of those to replenish that now suddenly reduced stock. So that is something that you will want to be cognizant of, especially if there's for any reason where you might want to cancel that transfer request, which could potentially put you into a situation where you might order maybe a little bit more than you had anticipated, because now you've got that coming in at one location. That being said, if let's say you ordered based on a potentially reduced quantity at one location, you cancel that request, then theoretically that would then be an overage at location 1 that you could order more for location 2, assuming that you weren't ordering for location 2 based on you thought you were going to do the transfer request, which I suppose now that I've spoken that out loud is kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But yes, it definitely would take that into consideration because it is going to be based on that quantity available, which is reduced when you do the transfers. So thank you very much for the question. Let's see if there's any other questions coming in. We got a few minutes left here in the session. Feel like I should be playing some Jeopardy music. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Rather than just sit here in dead silence and because it does look like some folks are filtering. Oh, Kara says that she has one. So Kara, I'll give you a few moments to type that in. By the way, what I was going to say was if you do have a question and I didn't get an opportunity to answer it here, because maybe you were in the instance of typing it up and I didn't stick around long enough, or maybe you don't want to ask it in front of the class per se, you can always email me those questions to training@technology4retailers.com. It's mentioned in the GoToWebinar emails there as well. So you can always ask me those questions that way too, and I'll be more than happy to answer them relating to these webinar topics. So Kara, feel free to, whenever you have that completed, go ahead and send it my way, and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so Kara asks, can two different locations access a PO worksheet for editing purposes without messing it up? So yes, technically, regardless of the location that you're at, because a PO worksheet is designed to order across all of your locations, someone from location A could go into that PO worksheet, type in the existing worksheet number and pull it up, make their changes, resave it as a worksheet, and then someone else from another location could come in and edit that same worksheet. Now, that being said, I have not specifically tested whether or not what might happen if two folks are editing it simultaneously at the same time. I'm not certain on that, so you may want to test that out before ultimately kind of going forward with that there, Kara. But yeah, I would think that should not be a problem as long as I would think that they're not editing it exactly at the same time. Technically, MSI is not going to make any differentiation of whether it needs to be edited at one location versus another. So yeah, I wouldn't think that'd be a problem. Kara says, thank you, and you're very welcome. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So like I said, I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is close down the session just a few minutes early. That gives everyone a chance to go and maybe run an errand early or ahead of time if you're planning on being here until 2, although it's just a few minutes. So, but that being said, thank you once again for attending the session. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday if that's an interest to you. And if nothing else, we'll see you around the corner. Go ahead, and I hope you make it a great day.